Hello, and welcome to this segment of The Issue at Hand. My name is Heather Prince Doss, and I will be your host for this segment. Today we are discussing voting rights in the City of Lowell and a lawsuit that has recently been brought against the city. This segment is brought to you by Lowell Votes and their organizational partners. Lowell Votes is a nonpartisan, volunteer-driven organization whose mission is to educate the community about the electoral process and encourage voter participation. My guests today are Sam Maes and Matt Mazzotta. Sam is a former U.S. congressional candidate for the 5th District, that's this district. He's the father of 2 girls and a financial coach with Executive State Bank. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
Matthew Mazzotta is an attorney with Ropes and Gray. Ropes and Gray is the firm representing the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the City of Lowell and working on a pro bono basis. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
Matt, could you get us started by just giving us a basic introduction to this lawsuit?
Sure. At its core, what I would say is the lawsuit is really about ensuring that all citizens in the City of Lowell have equal opportunity to vote for candidates of their choice and to get them elected to the city government in Lowell. Specifically, what the lawsuit alleges is that the current system of electing city council candidates and school committee candidates, which is an at-large system where everybody in the city votes citywide and the top vote getters get in, is discriminatory and denies an equal opportunity for some residents in the city from having an equal opportunity to vote for candidates of their choice and to get them onto the elected bodies.
Why does that happen? What is problematic about the at-large voting system? What's happening in that system that causes people of color not to be represented on the city council?
Well, I think the problem with the current systems is that it sort of disincentivizes the people from voting. For example, in a minority community where their favorite candidate could be getting a top voter in that particular neighborhood, but yet they do not get sufficient vote from the rest of the city, their candidate will not win the election. And election after election, when their candidate keep on losing, the voting efficacy of those minority groups are just not there anymore, and as a result, minorities tend not to participate anymore.
So because a minority candidate has a harder time getting elected when they have to campaign in the whole city, minorities are less likely then to come out and vote and less likely to participate. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
If I could add as well, though, one of the difficulties with an all-at-large system like here in the City of Lowell, 51% of the electorate, because every voter gets to vote for every single seat, and they're all voting at the same time.
And in Lowell we have 9 seats.
9 seats, that's correct, on the City Council, and 6 on the school committee. 51% of the electorate, if they are all voting in a similar way, can control the entire process and can elect their top candidates. So under the Voting Rights Act, which was passed in the 1960s as part of the Civil Rights Movement, part of the Voting Rights Act says that any system or procedure or program that results in unequal, discriminatory denial of the right to vote for a minority group violates Section 2. So when you have a system that is all at large, you can have 51% of the population controlling the vote, and whatever the minority population, no matter how many people come out to vote, they may not be able to actually elect their candidates of choice.
I see.
And I could make an analogy. So you could, this is not a perfect analogy, but you could think of it as if you had a family of 5 children, and every Friday night, is movie night, and every Friday night the kids vote. Well, if you have 3 kids that like Star Wars movies, you're going to watch a lot of Star Wars movies on Friday nights, and it doesn't matter how the other 2 vote. It doesn't matter how many of them vote. They're going to get outvoted almost every time. Now, you may have times when people switch their votes, But by and large, this is a pattern that can crop up.
And the results are pretty predictable.
Correct.
So I think it might be good to back up a little bit and just understand what the demographics of the City of Lowell are, and also the demographics of the City Council. I think we have a graph that we can put up that shows the population of Lowell as it relates to ethnicity and race. But could you say a little bit about the population of Lowell?
Sure. As of the latest census, the population of Lowell comprises of 51% white, 49 minorities. Of those minorities, there are 22% Asians and 18 Hispanics, and the rest is other ethnic minorities. They are Africans or Pacific Islanders.
So 51% white,
Mhm.
22% Asian American,
And 18 Hispanics.
18% Hispanic,
Yeah.
and then blacks,
rest.
African Americans, and Pacific Islanders make up the rest.
Correct.
And what about the City Council? What does the City Council look like, or has the City Council typically looked like?
Well, at the moment, the City Council is comprised of all white members, and the school committee is also all white. And if you go back over the last 5 elections, there's only been 2 Asian or Hispanic members of the City Council that the plaintiffs are aware of. And there has never, to my knowledge, been a minority member of the school committee. But I'm not 100% sure that's what we allege in the complaint.
Mhm.
So.
And is that a trend? Is there a trend of an increasing so-called minority population in Lowell?
That is correct. Yeah, the trend is increasing in terms of minority coming to Lowell. The new crops of immigrants are coming to the city. Will be coming from Africa mainly, but we still have constant inflow of Asian Americans coming to the city of Lowell as well.
Okay. So one of the complaints I've heard against the lawsuit is that the real issue has to do with voter turnout. If more people of color participated in elections, then they would be better represented on the City Council and the school committee. Is that a fair argument? Why or why not?
Man, go ahead.
I made the analogy earlier to the Friday night movie night. You can kind of intuitively understand why in a voting system where people might have different preferences, you could conceivably get a system that, even though there's no problem with preferring Star Wars to other movies, you might get a system that was unequal and provided unequal opportunities. I would say, when you look at voting rights cases around the country, not specifically here in Lowell, but these sorts of systems, all at-large systems, have been shown in other jurisdictions to have these effects, where even though there is sizable turnout and there is sizable support among certain communities for certain candidates, those candidates cannot get elected.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if I may add, is that the challenge as a minority candidate, I was one, is that it's difficult for a minority candidate like myself or other people to break through the what I call it, the old boys network. I mean, it's human nature. You vote for your cousin, your friend's cousin, and so on and so forth. You don't want the new guy coming in. So, no matter how hard the minority candidate can campaign, they just cannot break through that threshold. They cannot break through that network. Whereas a white candidate, the network is already established, and they may have a large extended family and friends in the city. So it's very easy for them to get the top, to be on the top of other candidates, particularly minority candidates. The example that I may bring back is the last council's election. We have four Asian American candidates running for city council, and 2 of them are top vote getters in their respective neighborhood. West Nanuen was a top vote getter in the Highland neighborhood, whereas Ratayam was a top vote getters in the Acres district. Although these 2 candidates were top vote getters in their respective neighborhood, they still lost the election, simply because they just could not muster enough vote from the city at large.
So that brings up a good question, and that is, what would work better? What are some examples of systems either that work in other places or in other areas that have had similar lawsuits? What are some possible solutions that might result in a city council that better reflects the demographics of the city of Lowell?
Well, a common remedy in this sort of lawsuit is to move to a district-based system or a combination of at-large and district seats. And that's also a very common form of government in Massachusetts for cities. Most large cities have a system of either district or district and at-large seats. There are other cities in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the country that use other types of systems. Cambridge, for example, which also has a Plan E form of government, they use what's called proportional representation or ranked choice voting, where voters go and they get to vote for every single candidate, but they have to put them in order. And then there's a mathematical formula that determines who gets to sit on the city council and the school committee. And under a proportional representation system, almost every voter gets one of their top 2 or 3 choices elected to the body. However, in a system, in an at-large system, similar to what you have here in Lowell, you can have circumstances where the top couple of candidates don't get elected for a certain percentage of people within the city or for a certain group of people within the city.
So this lawsuit is rooted in the Voting Rights Act, which was 1965, I think, as a result of the civil rights movement. Can you say just a little bit more about the history of the Civil Rights Act and or maybe the history of these kinds of lawsuits, just to help give us a little historical background?
Sure. So as you said, the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. It was passed during the Civil Rights era, and it was passed specifically to ensure that the constitutional guarantees in the 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution could be enforced. And what it prohibits is racial discrimination in voting. And the most important part of it for the purposes of our lawsuit is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits any practice or procedure that results in discrimination against a minority group. And again, that issue of results is kind of the most key part of it.
It's not about the intent.
It's not necessarily about the intent, exactly. It is about what is the result of the practice or procedure. And so in an at-large system, there have been many lawsuits around the country that have been brought alleging that at-large voting systems or very large districts, in kind of very, diverse and large populations, has the result of diluting the vote of a minority group. And what that means is when you have these kind of very large districts or you have an at-large system, a minority group that would have significant voting power, say 40% of the city being, a minority group, by having a very large at-large system or district, that minority group is not able to equally exercise its voting power, and that's called vote dilution. Mm-hmm. And so many at-large systems around the country have been shown to violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Sam, could you maybe say a little bit more about how Cambodians or Asian Americans experience that discrimination, or what you hear in the community from other Asian Americans?
Well, just to go back and reiterate what I have stated is that personally I met with so many people, and when election times come, when candidates go knock on their door and ask them to vote, they said, "Why should I vote?" And I said, "Well, I would list them all the reason, but their response would be that, I vote for Vesnanu, I vote for this and this, but my candidate never wins. So why should I waste my time? Because, they would say, the majority candidate would win anyway. So the election is predetermined. Mm. So it doesn't give them the incentive to really participate. So as a result, their participation rate decreases every year or every election cycle. Mm. Yeah.
So the lawsuit that the plaintiffs brought, I think it was 13 plaintiffs in the lawsuit, is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Yep. It was filed in May. What has been the response by the City of Lowell so far, and what might we expect to happen next?
Sure. So we filed the complaint, as you said, in May, and the city has a certain amount of time to respond to it. And the response by the city is coming up a week from the day of this taping. So we have not received an official response from the city at this point. What typically happens at this part of a case is we file a complaint which has the allegations that we hope to prove. None of them have been proved yet. And then the city or the other defendants have an opportunity to answer the complaint. And they file an answer that either accepts our allegations or denies them. It's very standard. They will probably deny the vast majority of them. It's exactly how these cases proceed. The other option for the city is to file what's called a motion to dismiss. And the motion to dismiss would ask the judge to throw the case out. And it's predicated on a legal issue. And so they could also file a motion to dismiss. They haven't filed anything yet, so we don't know whether they'll answer or move to dismiss the case.
And so if they answer and deny the allegations, what happens then? It goes to a judge, and a judge decides if the allegations are legitimate?
So if they answer, the kind of main part of the case then kicks off, and the parties exchange information. That's called discovery. We ask them for information, they ask us for information, and then somewhere down the road, the cases can take a year or longer. We would get to a trial. And when we get to a trial, the trial would be before a judge and a jury, and there would be ultimately at the end of the trial a decision as to whether or not the election system does violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
But the judge then wouldn't tell the city how to fix the problem, only that your claims of its brokenness are true.
So in Voting Rights Act cases, particularly at large cases, typically once there's a determination of liability that the system does violate Section 2 or whatever section the case is brought under, typically what then happens is the judge says to the parties or to the city, come up with a solution that satisfies Section 2. Sometimes the judge tells the parties to work on it together. Sometimes the judge tells the parties to each submit their own plan and the judge will decide. Sometimes the judge will say to the city or to a defendant, go ahead, come up with a plan, make sure that it satisfies Section 2. And the judge ultimately at that point, the judge's job is to make sure that whatever plan does get implemented does satisfy Section 2.
Okay. And Sam, what's your sense of the awareness in the Asian community or even the Latino community? Those are the two groups that are the defendants in the suit. Are they aware of the suit? Are they feeling encouraged or hopeful, or they think it won't make a difference?
They are very aware of it, and the information about the lawsuit, the actual lawsuit that has been filed against the city has been shared widely among the minority communities. They even translate those the lawsuit into their own respective language, which is Spanish and Khmer, so that they can further share those information and educate the community about the lawsuit and the changes that they would hope to bring forth to the city. And what they're hoping is that they would have a new system of electing city council as well as school committee, perhaps as an at-large, get rid of the at-large system and then introducing a district-based or a combination of a district-based and at-large system, similar to what the city of Boston or Lawrence or other major cities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And with President, excuse me, I have my cold here. The lawsuit in Springfield was very successful, and they are hopeful that it will not be prolonged as long as the one in the city of Springfield, that the length to have this case or this matter settled would be much quicker, because the longer it prolonged, it would just cost the city more money. And at the end, people were hopeful that the city would agree and will accept the changes as proposed by the people.
Well, and certainly the diversity of the city of Lowell is one of the things we celebrate most here. We're really proud of our diverse city. So I too have heard that hope that the city will embrace this as an opportunity to create a government that reflects the people who live here and who really make our community wonderful.
Correct, yes.
You mentioned Springfield, and that's come up in some other conversations I've had. I guess that's another example of a city that has had a similar suit. And I think earlier you mentioned Cambridge is in terms of their proportional representation. Did they also get there by a Voting Rights Act suit, or?
So Cambridge has always had, as far as I know, I actually live in Cambridge.
Okay.
Cambridge has always had the proportional representation. If you go back historically in Massachusetts, that was the standard method of election, and including here in Lowell back in prior to 1957, that was the method that was used here. And in 1957, there was a movement essentially across many different communities in Massachusetts to move to this kind of all-at-large, one vote per seat system.
So what was happening in 1957 that caused that change all over the state?
Sure. There were feelings, I think, at the time that there were a lot of groups that would get individuals who would kind of sit on these city councils or school committees who represented just one kind of individual ethnic group. So there was a feeling at the time that this was a way of promoting majority rule. Now, the negative consequence of that is that as you move forward into the civil rights era and beyond, what happens is it discriminates against protected minority groups. Again, the result of the system, not necessarily the intent of the system, discriminates potentially against minority groups in cities. So Springfield is a good example of that. There was a lawsuit that was brought in Springfield which had an at-large system very similar to Lowell's and to other communities across the United States. And there they litigated for quite a while, and then the city implemented a change, and they moved to a district and at-large combination system, and that's what they have now. And if you look at the composition of the city council and school committee, it's much more diverse and much more reflective of the people that live in the city of Springfield than the prior system.
And I've heard, so you're saying the litigation process took a while, but I've heard also that by the time they got to a settlement in Springfield, there was really broad buy-in and didn't have too much trouble sort of convincing the city, including the majority of the city, to sort of buy into the new system. Can you say more about that, or do you know more about that?
I don't know much about it, but I would hope that the people, as well as the leaders of the City of Lowell, would come to that kind of understanding and agreement that the City of Springfield had. And given the sentiment at the moment, I think that we will not take long. That's my hope, of course, that the city will not drag on this process much longer, and that it would be implemented hopefully in the next election cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we do have an election coming up here in Lowell.
Mm-hmm.
What's your sense of how this is impacting that? Is it something the candidates are talking about? Is it something constituents are asking about?
Not at the moment, unfortunately. At the moment, the singular issue that are divisive and dividing the community is the location of the new Lowell High School.
Yes.
And either you're against it or you're for it. So that's it. I mean, because the City of Lowell and the taxpayers are about to spend at least $350 million, and that's important because it's, property tax will be affected by it, depending no matter where the location is being built. But both camps are trying to pull it, and this is the driving issue of the day.
That's a different show.
Right.
It certainly is a priority issue, but I hope that, my hope at least, is that this issue of the how we vote in Lowell, how our city council and school committee is elected will be important for the candidates and for constituents, so that when somebody knocks on your door, maybe it's a question that people can ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Education is certainly one of the goals of Lowell Votes, and there are some other events coming up related to this. Are there other things you would like the City of Lowell to know about education or civic engagement?
Well, right now the primary is coming up on September 26th. So I'm asking everybody who is a registered voter in the City of Lowell to come out and vote for their favorite candidates, and hopefully, we will bring some changes to the city after this September primary.
And so in the primary, do we also elect how many out of the 20-some
Right
that are
now,
running
there
for
are 23
office?
candidates
Yeah,
running
thank
for
you.
office, and after the primary, there will be 18 candidates left. And
So when I go to the primary on September 26th, I'll choose 18 out of 23.
you choose 9.
I choose 9.
You choose 9, yes.
So the top 18 vote getters will move on to
the next round, yes.
November election.
Correct.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good to know. I know we'll also have another event coming up hosted by Lowell Votes. That's going to be in October. We don't have a date or a location nailed down quite yet, but it will be another informational forum similar to the conversation that we've had here, but it's geared really for the whole community. We'll invite people to come and learn a little bit about how to have these conversations in your own settings. That will be offered in multiple languages, so whether you speak English or Khmer or Spanish, we'll have translators available. We'll again present the background on the facts of the lawsuit. We'll do some role playing on the conversations in the community and on the voting rights lawsuit. If you'd like to learn more in general about nonpartisan civics work, about how to get involved in your local government, I encourage you to get connected with Lowell Votes either on their website or through social media. If you're interested in following this lawsuit and seeing what the steps in the process are and how the city responds, hopefully by the end of next week. That's what you said, yeah?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
You can stay in touch through the Lowell Alliance on their website and on social media, and they will be continuing to post updates. I am so thankful to have spent this time with the two of you. I've certainly learned a little bit more about how our electoral system works here in Lowell, and just being with you and hearing this makes me feel hopeful about the future of our city. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining us for this segment of The Issue at Hand. Don't forget to vote in the primary on September 26th. Thank you.